Thank you for having me here in this beautiful room. Yes, and I suggested that I would um, give you some kind of explanation of you all, of course, follow current events and you know what's going on. You, of course, following the war, but you might know how it happened, how it originated, and how it started. And as Otto said, I've been spending before the war started. I've been spending a few years writing this book, which is yes, a political biography of Boris Nemtsov. You probably heard the name. But not only that, it's also the idea of the book that it's also as much the story of Russia. Political story of Russia, of how it happened, how we found ourselves where we are now, before the war, because I finished the book in February, right, like 2 weeks before the war started. And the irony of the moment was that I was already out of Russia because I couldn't stay there, and but the book came out in Russia, in Russian. So, and it's and I sort of what I did, I spent a few years sort of reliving Russia's history, Russia's recent history, when basically Russia started as a new state, new country, new political regime in late 80s, early 90s, and trying to find answers to how it happened that newborn Russia, which aspired to become a modern civilized state and country, nation, part of the civilized world and the democracy, ended where it ended. Again, I was doing it before the war, but where Russia stood before the war and what's going on with all of us, it already have been clear for many years. So I've been trying to find answers to these questions, and that's why I know how this war started and what is the story of Putin's relation with Ukraine and how it developed. It actually really helped me to understand what is Russia and what were these major triggers that made Russian leadership make these turns and finally lead us all to where we found ourselves. And if you start reading this book, you will find that that there are two wars that basically define Russia's history. The first war, which lasts through the first half of this book, because it's half sort of 90s, half 2000s, is the war in Chechnya that you probably heard about, which started in late 1994, and then developed into a second war in Chechnya, which already was led by Putin starting from 1999 for 2-3 years. And the second war is, well, starts as a conflict, but that's Putin's conflict with Ukraine. It basically, it just happens that this book contains all the story of how and why it started and how it defined Russian political regime as well. So what I want to do is just tell you this story. Try to be short, but I'm not a very experienced lecturer, so you please excuse me if something goes wrong. And also I wanted to prepare some kind of pictures or something, but I failed. I'm not that good at PowerPoint, so that's not my thing. So I'll try just to give you this story and to lead you through last 20 years, and it will make, I think, clearer what actually happened and why on February 24th. Also, the message that is important that I'm standing by is that as a Russian, of course, I feel my own personal responsibility for what is going on, and because I never voted for Putin, but it doesn't matter. In an authoritarian regime, it's not about voting; it's about how your choices you make. I'm not sure I always made correct ones, but it's not. But what my message is that it's not Russia's war with Ukraine; it's Putin's war with Ukraine, and it's incredibly important. It's Putin's personal adventure, Putin's personal quest, Putin's personal ambition, which became paramount for him for various reasons, and it's deeply interconnected. Well, and now during last month, of course, there is a huge debate on what Russia is, what Russia historically, traditionally is, what Russian nation traditionally is, how Russia suffers historically from this imperial syndrome because it always been an empire and couldn't sort of leave it behind when it started its new life as Russia after Soviet Union collapsed, which is partly true, of course, and political, national, social life is rich and different, and it's not black and white. Never. It's always there are always interconnections and gray zones and everything, and of course this kind of syndrome it exists. But what I think is important and what I will stand by is that it's not this imperial syndrome that I would define it like this. Imperial syndrome and made this war possible. But what made it inevitable was something else. And this is tyranny. This is indefinite rule which Putin established in Russia. If Putin would leave as he would not come back as president in 2012, as he did, this war would never happen. If Russian elections would not be rigged, all of them, starting from 2007, if independent voices would be possible to hear in Russian parliament, just a single one, just one, this war would never happen. And that, I think, is more important that these frustrations, which, of course, Russians bear as a nation, and they've been nurtured by propaganda, and that this emotion was nurtured by propaganda for more than 20 years now, and it's, of course, the case. But what is crucial is not what nation feels about it, but what the leadership did. And so that's basically what I think is important. And I'll try to prove it. I'll try to sort of show you how it started and how Putin became obsessed with Ukraine. So let's first, again, I don't know how much, but I think we have some time because I don't know how long it will take. I'm not that experienced lecturer, but again, let's set the stage and try to recall. Think about what Putin was, who Putin was when he took power, became Russian president in the year 2000, and what is important to know about him, to understand in which capacity he enters Russia's political stage and becomes leader of Russia. Well, we of course we all know that he is a KGB officer, that he originates from KGB. This is of course important, but from my perspective, what is more important is that he's not a political type of person. He's not. He has never, before he became president of Russia, he never took part in any election personally. He helped Sobchak in St. Petersburg in mid-90s to run the city and to Sobchak, mayor of St. Petersburg of that time, to run the city. He was basically his right hand, but basically he was just a clerk, a bureaucrat, a business-minded kind of official who always acted from basically behind the scenes. You will find very not so many interviews that Putin gave in the 90s when it was basically very different political climate, and Russia was very open and easily accessible, etc. But what is also important is that when he arrived to Kremlin in 1990, end of late 1996, he started in Moscow, in Kremlin, as a mid-range type of Kremlin official, basically a nobody. And he made incredible career, extremely fast. He, in 1997, he is just a head of a department, something like that, in the Kremlin. In 2 years, in 1998, he is the head of FSB, successor of KGB, Russia's main special force. That's incredible jump forward. So he made the speed of his career inside the Kremlin under late Yeltsin was very fast. In '99, when he becomes Yeltsin's successor, when Yeltsin nominates him as his successor, it's summer 1999 when Yeltsin, another story why he picked up Putin, I will not elaborate on that right now. That's not what the story is about, but he names Putin as his prime minister in August 1999 and tells the nation that he is next president. That's what happens. At this point, just imagine, 3 out of 4 Russians never heard his name. Basically don't know how he looks like. He just out of the blue, a new face emerges as a prime minister and Yeltsin's successor. That's a big deal. And from that point on, in August 1999, until in 3 months, he propels to national popularity. And when he is nominated as next Russian president, nobody even believes in it, because how can a guy who nobody even knows can really win the election? It looks totally impossible for even for the establishment. But that's what happens. In 3 months, he becomes really the national leader. And that's something amazing, absolutely, you just never happens. But that's what happened. And 2 major factors played its role that propelled him to this position of future president, and that it would be impossible to compete with. The first is, of course, television. So that's when television propaganda, well, it started really even before that, but that's when it plays huge role in, starts playing huge role in Russian political life. So the first factor is national television. The second is the war in Chechnya, which he started, the second war, which starts, it's a coincidence, I believe, but it starts also in August 1999, and Putin emerges as commander of this warship. without going deep into the again, it's not what our story is about. Without going deep into the story of war in Chechnya, in the second war in Chechnya, which started in, as I said, in August 1999. I think we have now, in retrospect, it's very important. It seems very important and also visible that politically it was a deep sort of prequel to Putin's war with Ukraine, because it was then when the whole nation was labeled as back then it was Chechens were labeled as terrorists. It started after terror attacks in Moscow in September 1999, when 2 residential buildings basically were blown to ground, and there is a conspiracy theory that it was, as always, but I don't believe, and I don't take it. This conspiracy theory, I think it's never been proven that it's the state special forces who who actually blew these apartment buildings in Moscow. I think it was a terror attack without anything else proven. But that's when Putin declared his fight on terrorism. It was supported hugely by the nation. This is true, and that's when Chechens were labeled as terrorists. Now, in February this year, Putin labeled Ukrainians as Nazis, as you probably heard. And it's basically the same tactics, the same. We recognized it from back then. It's now it looks like it's important to understand and remember. So that's how Putin starts his rule. But we also have to remember that in early 2000s, Russia was still heading towards the West. We might say Putin, as Yeltsin's successor, competed with communists, with political forces who actually were thriving for Russian Empire and stuff like that. But he was picked up and behaved as a modern type of leader and successor of Yeltsin's political direction, which always was, well, with its, again, turns, but still was that the idea was that Russia would become, it's not an easy path and a not straightforward path, but still Russia has to become a civilized, modern, democratic state. And when Putin started, he started implementing liberal economic reforms. For first 2 years, that was the case. They went easier than under Yeltsin, because now Putin had support in the parliament, which Yeltsin never had. And also, it started as a new, on very good terms with the world and with the West. And if you remember, Putin was the first one to call George Bush in 2001 on September 11, and that's when, if you take a look in Condoleezza Rice's memoir, she would write there that that's when I thought the Cold War is over. That's a direct quote. That's how Putin started as a Russian leader, and he is very successful. Oil prices start going up again. A coincidence, but that's how it happens. That's what happened. So Russia is through these calamities of the 90s, and when Russia defaulted in 1998, and it was really very hard, and now it's getting better and better with every year, with every month. And of course, this new Russia, this new Kremlin, this new leadership starts looking around. What's happened? What's going on around Russia's borders? And it starts looking westward, and it looks, and it sees two nations, two states, Belarus and Ukraine. So Belarus, we are now, let's say, in 2002. Belarus is ruled by Alexander Lukashenko, who is already Belarusian dictator for 8 years, who already murders his political opponents, who eliminated any kind of freedom already by 2002. But in 1990, I think it was in 1996, when Lukashenko and Yeltsin agreed on trying to build a new sort of union, Russia's Belarusian union, sort of which for Lukashenko back then was a platform, as he thought, that how he could actually overtake Russia's leadership and become leader of Russia. That's how he looked at this union when he started it with Yeltsin a few years ago. But the situation in the early 2000s is already very different, and he understands pretty well that there's nothing he can do, and it's Putin who tries to sort of revitalize this union and to integrate Russia and Belarus. And Lukashenko is already resisting that, and he would resist that since then for forever. Even now he can, well, to extent he can do that, he still does, not entering the war directly, for example. And again, since Russia is heading towards this normal civilized type of political regime and relationship with the world, it doesn't look like a problem. I mean, why not? It was quite a popular liberal idea back then, supported by liberal pro-European forces, that Russia should unite with Belarus, which is run by this tyrant Lukashenko. Which Russia is not a tyranny. Russia is a developing democracy. It was called back then managed democracy. That was the term which started in early 2000s, which meant that yes, everything, more or less, political field is under government's control. And Putin expands his power when he becomes Russia's leader. Gradually, parliament becomes loyal. Television, that was the first thing he did, because he remembers personally very well what television can do, because it was television which propelled him from an unknown official to Russia's presidency. So the first thing he does as Russia's president, he takes control over television and starts basically censorship. It starts in just the next day he becomes president. So he takes political institutions under control. But at the same time, opposition is allowed, dissenting voices are allowed, and unlike in Ukraine, in Belarus, I'm sorry, for example. And the idea is that yes, on this at this point, Russia has to be managed through these difficult times. But later, it would still become join the democratic world as a full-scale democracy. That is the idea. I mean, there are some bad signs which contradict that vision, but the idea is more or less that. And that's the stage for when the Kremlin starts looking westward and looks at Belarus, trying to push Lukashenko to integrate, and to Ukraine. So what is Ukraine in this early 2000s? Ukraine has a very different political climate from Belarus. It's President Kuchma's second term, and President Leonid Kuchma, who is Ukraine's second president. And Kuchma is in a very sort of difficult position. He started his first presidential term in, I think, 1995. I think it was 1995. 1995. Now it's his second. In 1999, it's his second presidential term, and he has to think what's next. Next presidential election is in 2003 in Ukraine. And by end of 2000, the year 2000, it's clear for everyone and for Kuchma himself that, yes, he of course wants to hold on power. He is a Soviet type of leader. He wants to stay in power, of course, forever. That's a natural ambition of everybody. If you can afford it, if you can make it. But he already understands that it's probably not the case, because he's hardly damaged by a scandal, which so-called Melnichenko's tapes, when in late 2000, Kuchma was exposed as possibly connected to the murder of quite well-known Ukrainian journalist Georgy Gongadze. And that happened in the year 2000, and these tapes with his voice, they are all across Ukraine, in Kiev, everywhere, and that's when he is basically done. He cannot survive politically this crisis that he faced. And Ukraine finds itself somewhat at crossroads politically again, because the question is which path Ukraine would choose. Well, it has to answer the question, is it a post-Soviet autocracy, like, take a look at Belarus, very, very close to the north, or it is European democracy. And that's the question which is in the air. And Ukraine has to answer it, because basically the political system in Ukraine contains elements from both systems. It is politically open, it is competitive, it has a parliament, sort of really operating as a political institution. It has freedom of press, it has parties, etc. This is all true about Ukraine, but at the same time, the government is corrupt. Its oligarchs are connected to power and exercise their behind-the-scenes deals, and it's also the case. And again, the leadership has this sort of knee-jerk ambition to stay in power forever, as Kuchma does. But and Kuchma has to navigate this reality. What is it? Part of Europe, basically, or something else? What's the next step? Where would Ukraine go from there? And Kuchma has to sort of, yes, plays this double game between the West and Russia and Putin, because at that time Putin creates his first starts his first integrational project on post-Soviet space, which is called Eurasian Economic Community back then. The idea is that post-Soviet states would unite in, like similarly to European Union, in some kind of form, and free trade, etc., taxes, whatever it is. But it's a political project, of course. And Kuchma, at the same time, he signs the declaration that he Ukraine would join this Russian project, and at the same time, he signs it in Ukrainian constitution that Ukraine is heading towards NATO. Basically, at the same time, he tries to take both ways at the same time. Yet again, if Russia is still heading towards normal civilized world, it's not a big problem, because why? If everyone is heading the same direction, there is not a big deal. If you can join whatever you want, if we're all moving in the same direction. The problem is that by 2004, when this election happens, and Ukraine finally has to make this choice, Russia is already very different from what it was even in 2002. By 2004, this flirt with the West is over. Putin establishes himself as an authoritarian type of leader who has everything under control, and the major case which manifests the new position he finds himself in, and the new story that he starts for Russia is the arrest of Russia's most richest man, Mikhail Khodorkovsky, head of UKAS, in October 2003. That's a turning point when everybody understands that no, Russia is not going where it was saying it was going. No, it's not the case anymore, and it happens in 2003. That's an assault on freedoms that everybody understands that no, Russia is not trying to play by the rules that the whole world plays by. So in this context, Kuchma has to find himself a successor, because he understands that he can't stay for third term. It would be impossible. Ukraine is so competitive that he can't go through his political problems, and he needs to pick up a successor. And for presidential election, which is looming in 2004, he backs up governor of Donetsk, and at this time already he's prime minister, Viktor Yanukovych. Opposition to Kuchma and his successor is represented by Viktor Yushchenko, former prime minister of Ukraine, and these are two major forces which would compete for presidency in 2004, and it happens that they represent these choices that Ukraine stands in front of, which is the first one is post-Soviet autocracy, represented by Yanukovych, connected to oligarchs, ruling the politics from above, and Yushchenko represents this idea of vision of European future for Ukraine. It's also important to understand that Ukraine is very culturally diverse. It's the industrial East, from which Yanukovych comes, is pro-Russian, and people speak Russian there, and they are connected to Russia. Many of them feel themselves as Russian. Again, we're talking about 2003. The West is culturally part of Eastern European world. And these differences, they were part of their Ukrainian life since Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, but they never manifested themselves politically. They never were sort of important. But in 2004, during this election, they are really intensified by the presidential race. Because they are put on the table by the playing parties. If you wonder why Russian propaganda now labels Ukrainians as Nazis and the whole where this narrative comes from, that Russia is fighting Nazis in Ukraine, I can tell you it originates in 2003, when Viktor Yushchenko comes as part of his presidential campaign already, comes to Donetsk, to Donbass, to eastern part of Ukraine, and the city again. Of course, it came from the above, from Yanukovych's presidential camp. It was a political stunt. And the city meets him with billboards on which Yushchenko impersonates Hitler, and slogans like "No to Nazism" and so on and so on. It was a political stunt which originated inside Yanukovych's campaign to label Western Ukraine as Nazis, and Yushchenko. Yushchenko is coming, and it's danger for the East. So, and now we see that it's how it evolved into a war narrative almost 20 years later. So, in 2004, when this choice has to be made and somebody has to become Ukrainian president, it's a choice already between authoritarian Russia and democratic Europe. That's kind of choice that Ukraine has to make, which it didn't have to make before. Before it sort of could play both, but now decision has to be made somehow. So we are now in 2004, and Putin, who already, as I told, is changed the nature of Russian political regime. And this is very important, because this is what I've started with, that Putin's relations with Ukraine are connected to his ambition inside Russia and who he is inside Russia, and the type of political regime he's building inside Russia. By then, Putin is already an authoritarian leader, having everything under control in his country, and he backs up Yanukovych. He heavily invests in his campaign. He spends days in Kiev in 2004. There is a propagandist sort of type of communication in Russia, which he invented when he started as Russian president, which is called direct line with Putin. It's a staged kind of conversation when Putin talks to the nation. He sits and takes questions from wherever it is in Russia, and it's all staged, and of course it's a show. And the first one started in 2000 or 2001, and he gives them every year. Since then, it's basically this idea that he doesn't need any intermediaries between him and the nation, that he is direct extension. Parliament, whatever, democratic institutions, no need. He even does that in Kiev in 2004. He talks to Ukrainians in live, takes their questions, answers, whatever. So he really heavily invests in Yanukovych. So, and then the election happens. It's November, I think, maybe yeah, early November to 2004. And the runoff is Yanukovych versus Yushchenko. And at this runoff, everybody understands that Yushchenko will win, that he is the winner, he is the front runner. He is ahead. And exit polls show that he is ahead, few percent, like 4 or 5% ahead. Not much. Yanukovych enjoys full support from the east, but Kiev is for Yushchenko, and central and western Ukraine are for Yushchenko. So he is the winner. And what happens is that the election is rigged, and that's apparently a proven fact. And Yanukovych is named as the winner of the election and Ukrainian president. And Putin, of course, congratulates him famously, which is it's quite well known how he immediately congratulates Yanukovych. Though at this very moment, Kiev takes to the streets, and that's how Orange Revolution, that you probably heard about, starts. When Ukrainians do not agree with stealing the election from them and take to the streets, Kiev becomes totally, absolutely orange. I was there back then. It was really orange, and Ukraine enters its political crisis. What happens next? We have to give credit to Kuchma, because it was in his hands to handle this crisis and to decide what to do with it, because technically Kiev said no, we're not taking Yanukovych as president. It doesn't happen. It's revolution, sort of. And we have to give credit to Kuchma that he abstained from using force. He could, but he didn't. That was his call and his decision. And a few years later, he would admit in an interview with, I think, BBC that Putin was pushing him towards use of force, but not very strongly, as he said that back then. He suggested use of force. Putin that no, you have to sort of the election has taken place. We have to all admit the results. But Kuchma didn't do that, and that's how the crisis was resolved. It was again the re-election, and Yushchenko won and became president of Ukraine, and Yanukovych lost. That was the outcome of the Orange Revolution in November 2004, and that was Putin's first loss in Ukraine. He heavily invested in Yanukovych, and he lost. That was his first loss ever as Russia's leader, and very frustrating for him personally. I remember, and that's when he became obsessed with Ukraine. And for this book, I interviewed Oleg Rybachuk, who was Yushchenko's chief of staff after he became president, and he recalls when he comes to Moscow in January 2005, and he's introduced to Putin, and they talk, and he Oleg Rybachuk, he starts to talking about what happened during the election, how the election was rigged, and what happened to Putin. And Putin stopped him, and he said, well, we know very well what happened. Please do not even elaborate. We know very well who, when, how, what happened during this election. These are exactly same words that Putin would use when Secretary General of United Nations, what's his name? Right now, would come to Moscow few months ago and talked. You're right. Would come to Moscow and talk to Putin about what happened in Bucha, and near Kiev. You understand what I'm talking about, right? And Putin would say, we know what happened. Meaning that it's all fake and staged, and Russian military was not torturing and killing and murdering Ukrainians. That's when, in 2004, that's the first sign, well, one of the first signs that, of Putin starting to create his own universe, fictional universe, in which he would turn Russia into during all the following years. And I also interviewed Alexander Verzhbo, who was American ambassador back then in Moscow, and he tells the story of how one of Putin's officials comes to him, joins him at lunch in Moscow after Orange Revolution, after Yushchenko becomes president, and tells him, Putin is furious because the United States have stolen Ukraine from him. That's how Putin sees what happened in the fall of 2004 in Ukraine. That's an exact quote. So that's very important, and important to know and to understand from where Putin's obsession comes from, and how he starts create his fictional realities from which actually he attacked, invaded Ukraine a few months ago. So Orange Revolution is of 2004 was. We still have time, right? Yeah. Okay. Yes. So Orange Revolution was a big blow, and Putin becomes obsessed with revolutions. The idea which dominates in the Kremlin at this moment is that, yes, they have taken Ukraine, the West, Russia is next, and that's and it deeply affects Russia's political regime, and that's when managed democracy is already forgotten, and now the new term emerges of what Russia is. Russia is sovereign democracy. That's a new term invented in 2005 after Orange Revolution, and by its because of the Orange Revolution, of course. So it means that it's democracy, but a different one. And the key meaning is that Putin can do whatever he wants. That's basically the meaning of sovereign democracy. And the final destination is that Russia is not a Western type of democracy. It is something else. It's not heading where the whole world goes. It's heading somewhere else. Nobody knows where and what is this final destination of sovereign democracy, but it's totally different direction. In a recent interview, Alexei Arestovich, again, you probably know the name, who is advisor to Ukrainian president, he says in one of his recent interviews that the plan to invade Ukraine, the decision to invade was made in 2005. I think that's an exaggeration. That didn't happen in 2005. But this is when Putin's imperial ambitions start to really take shape. In the same Condoleezza Rice's memoir, which I already mentioned, she recalls then meeting Putin in 2005, April 2005, I think, and she meets Putin, and he tells her that his ambition is not to recreate USSR, Soviet Union, but there is a but. The newly independent states had taken their institutions and wealth from the Soviet Union, and that's why Moscow has a deep interest in what is going on there. That's when you would, if you take Putin's speeches about Ukraine, you would find that that for many years already he's talking about presents, that Russia gave presents to Ukraine, and now it's time to take them back, apparently. So that idea that neighboring nations enjoyed Russia's presence and owe something to Russia and Putin, Condoleezza Rice talks about it in 2005. That's already his idea in 2005. His obsession grows. His values gap with the West grows. His cult in Russia grows. In 2007, he gives his so-called Munich speech, which is considered to be sort of historical point when he turns against the West, and it's the first time when he actually accuses NATO of treacherously expanding westward, eastward in the 90s. Now it's common sort of knowledge for Putin. Basically, the main idea behind all the hostilities, that NATO started expanding eastward, though promised not to do that. And the first time he speaks about it is 2007. In 2008, he tells, and it's reported in the press, and Biden's head of CIA, Bill Burns, who was long ambassador in Moscow, American ambassador in Moscow. In his recent memoir, he also tells about it, that it's the exact same story in the exact same words. When Putin tells them both, first to Bill Burns in early 2008, and then personally to American President George Bush, that Ukraine is not even a state. That's what, that by 2008, his mind is set. Ukraine is not a state. Part of it is historically Russia, he says, and part of it is Eastern Europe. And now, and again, during last years, you will easily see how that Ukraine is a fictional state constructed by Lenin after Bolsheviks' revolution, and so on and so on. But it started again. This idea, this message behind this war, that Ukraine is not a state, it took shape by 2008. That's also important to remember. So we skipped a few years, and we're back now. And now we're back in 2012, when Putin comes back to the Kremlin as Russia's president. You remember, again, Dmitry Medvedev was Russia's president for a few years, for 4 years. It's not Medvedev we know now. That was a different one. And we hear now it was a different Medvedev who shared hamburgers with Obama, who started reset with America and the West. And there was hope that yes, if Putin doesn't come back, that Russia would be back on track, sort of. There was this kind of hope. And again, it was supported by evidence, mostly again in Russia's relationship with the West, because Medvedev certainly sort of starts anew. And I remember very well. Now it's what? It was 2010. I remember being on Red Square parade and May 9 military parade, and every allies nation is invited, and there is a British force and French force and American force, and it is glorified as Russia. The whole world's victory over Hitler. Totally different from what it is now, when the same Medvedev would frame framed the West as a successor to Third Reich. So it was really happening. Russia was discussing when and how it would become visa-free with the Schengen area. The joint summit with NATO in Lisbon in again 2010 was a breakthrough, and it was like you can easily find headlines in Russian newspapers. Is it for real? Russia is joining NATO in 2010. It's I can remind you that by then already Russia's invasion in Georgia already happened in 2008. But that's what was happening in Medvedev's times. But then Putin is back. He returns to the Kremlin as a Tsar. He is met, if you remember, by Bolotnaya movement, by protests on scale that Russia never saw since early 90s against his comeback. Largest protest. He treats these protests, of course, as another attempt of color revolution in Russia, inspired by the West and in Washington. He crushes Bolotnaya movement and all these protests, and that's when he starts to present himself as a sort of conservative leader. Because before that it was never the case. But now he is a defender of traditional values. Now Russia starts introducing anti-gay legislation in the parliament. Now religion is on political scene, and Russia's Orthodox Church is on political scene, which never was the case nor in Yeltsin's times, nor neither under early Putin. But now it is. It happens just because he understands that he has a position within Russian society, within Russian nation, and this position is driven by these are people who want Russia to be part of global world. So he has to frame himself somehow as why he is fighting them. So he is fighting them because he is a conservative, traditional type of leader. And he comes back with a plan in 2012. The plan is called Eurasian Union. And this is when, in one of his articles in 2011, before he comes back to Kremlin, he starts talking about Greater Russia, which is, Russia is not what it is now. It's historically larger, it's greater. And implementation of this Greater Russia is this Eurasian Union, which is in some sort of, again, the second iteration of that Eurasian community that he was building, trying to build with Ukraine in 2002. Remember, I was talking when Kuchma signed the papers. Basically the same, but deeper this time. Kazakhstan, Belarus, and of course Ukraine has to be part of this new integrational Putin's project on post-Soviet space. We're now in 2012. So let's again look at Ukraine. What goes on in Ukraine? And we find out that Orange Revolution was not a real revolution. It didn't really change the system in Ukraine. Yes, people spoke out. Ukrainians, Yushchenko became president, but the system is still the same. It's corrupt. And it has been overtaken by Yanukovych, who won presidential election in 2010, I guess, and very quickly again starts doing everything that an authoritarian leader always does when he comes to power, eliminating freedoms, suppressing opposition, puts Yulia Tymoshenko, his main competitor at the presidential election, in jail, and his time in the office as Ukrainian's president is seen by Ukrainian journalists as the most corrupt government ever, maybe in the history of Ukraine. That's how Yanukovych runs Ukraine when he comes to power. He also well, whatever, it's not probably important, but he changes the constitution to extend his powers, because when Yushchenko became president, he shared presidential powers with parliament. Now Yanukovych takes them back, and but he finds himself in a position close to sort of in what Kuchma was in 2002, 2003, because yes, Moscow sees him as its natural ally in this new world, Yanukovych, and his only ambition is to stay in power forever, of course. But he understands that in order to win the next election, he has to show Ukrainians who are very pro-European, more than half of them, to show them that he is heading towards the West, and he agrees to sign so-called, it's called, I think it's called European Association Agreement, which is path to join European Union in the future, economic type of trade-free, entering trade-free zone, etc., etc. And he is ready to sign these papers and to join as Ukraine this European integrational project. But Putin has his own project, which is this Eurasian Union, and in 2013, Putin comes to Kiev, and then he starts. That's his first attack. He starts a trade war with Ukraine. Ukrainian goods are not allowed to in Russia. Stopped at the border. Real kind of war. The idea is to press the government to that it will show to Ukrainians that Russia Ukraine is hugely dependent on, and we're not even talking about gas, which Ukraine is deeply dependent on Russian gas. And the idea is that Ukrainians would be frightened of losing Russian market, and would press the government to join this integrational project with Russia. That's the idea behind this trade war that Putin starts in 2013. The idea was the plan was suggested by Viktor Medvedchuk and Sergei Glaziev, one of Putin's advisors, and but happens totally the opposite. The more with the start of this trade war, Ukrainians what Ukrainians do, the anti-Russian sentiment starts to grow, and the more they are pushed, the more they want to join this European project. So nobody knows what. It's a historical meeting between Putin and Yanukovych on November 9 in 2013, and nobody knows what he told Yanukovych during this meeting. But one of Ukrainian officials later exposed that he knows again. Well, it was reported that that Putin told him that he would that Russia would never border a NATO or European Union country, it will never happen. So that means Ukraine will never be part of European Union or NATO. And if Yanukovych signs this European association, Putin will take, that's a direct quote, Eastern Ukraine. He will take Donetsk, Luhansk, Nikolaev, Kharkiv, Odessa, and Zaporizhia. These are areas which he invaded in February. So and 1 week before signing this agreement, which was supposed to happen in Vilnius on November 2029, Yanukovych backs off and says he will not sign it. That the economic situation is different, and he has to postpone the joining European integrational program, and that's when second revolution happens in Ukraine. Now for real. That's when so-called Euromaidan starts, also known as Revolution of Dignity. That's when first Kiev students from Kiev take to the streets, end of November, early December, and that's when the crucial developments take place. Kremlin is deeply involved in dealing with these protests, suppressing the street protests in Kiev, and opposite of what happened in 2004, this time it turns violent, and people start dying on the streets of Kiev in January, February 2014. And it ended with Yanukovych fleeing Kiev, and the street, Euromaidan, wins. And that's Putin's second crucial loss in Ukraine, something that he didn't expect would happen. He again miscalculated. And that's when he took Crimea and started war in Donbass, which was zero phase on the current war. So I'm near the end already. What is important is that that Putin, since then, it's again from 2014, he refers to these events in Kiev in January, February 2014 as a coup. His message is that he basically every time he talks about Ukraine, he states it, that Yanukovych was all ready to sign the compromise, that Yanukovych wouldn't win next election. Why would Western leaders, here of course he means Washington, why would they push them to do what they did? Washington pushed further, and although Yanukovych was happy to compromise, they didn't allow the street to accept this compromise. That's his message. These leaders, Western leaders. This is totally untrue. This is just not the case. Not what happened. What happened was directly the opposite. In 2014, Western leaders, Western envoys on Maidan tried to find solutions, tried to find deals, in order to try to find compromises and to make peace between the street and Yanukovych in order to resolve the crisis through election in 2015. On February 2021, the day that Yanukovych finally fled at night, and after the most bloody day in Kiev, which was February 20, envoys from Poland and also from somewhere else. It was not only a Polish guy, but somebody else as well. They were pressing on leaders of Euromaidan to accept the compromise that they signed with Yanukovych the day before. They were pushing leaders of Euromaidan to accept this deal, and they did. But the street didn't accept it. Because what happened in Kiev, in Ukraine, in 2014 was real revolution. Now for real. It was not about, it was not like in 2004. It was a real, probably the only real revolution after Soviet Union collapsed in '99 on post-Soviet space. They just couldn't do anything about it, and happened what happened. But Putin doesn't believe in people's will. He believes in behind-the-scenes type of political game. His idea is that everybody fakes democracy like he does, but these guys are just better at it than he is. That's the only difference. People's will, their minds, their voices, they do not mean anything. It's about leaders dealing and powers dealing with each other. That's how he sees the world. So that's why he presents it as a coup since then. But what is important that it was a big loss for him, and that's when he started. He is already extremely frustrated because Ukraine is territory that he keeps losing in. Just every time he involves, he gets beaten. So what happens? We are done. Because afterwards, basically you already know better what happened. I will not go deep into that, but I will tell you that he starts the war in Donbass, and the idea, and then he signs so-called Minsk agreements with the next Ukrainian president Poroshenko, and the idea of these agreements is that if they are implemented, then basically Ukraine is divided in two halves, and the eastern Ukraine acquires special constitutional status, which allows Moscow through authorities of eastern Ukraine to affect political decisions in Kiev. That's the idea of Minsk agreements, which he signs with Poroshenko in 2015. They are not implemented because Ukraine, it's politically impossible to implement them. That means collapse of Ukraine as a state, and it's not the case. But he's still not losing hope, and his hope lies with the next Ukrainian president Vladimir Zelensky, who becomes president of Ukraine in 2019. Because, well, okay, this is a new guy. Who is he? He's a stand-up performer and basically nobody. And now he will succumb. He will totally succumb to pressure. And the idea is that Moscow will make him accept these Minsk agreements and finally take over Ukraine. They even meet in late 2019 in Paris. By 2020, in March, it collapses, and Moscow understands that it's not doable, that there is nothing that can be done, and Zelensky is not implementing these Minsk agreements. And that's when his idea of actually invading Ukraine, because he failed already 3 times, starts to take shape. And again, it's deeply connected to what's going on in Russia, because I will remind you that in 2020, Russia officially turns into a tyranny when Putin amends the constitution. And in summer 2020, he basically writes new constitution for Russia, in which it's written virtually that he will rule Russia forever. Well, it's not what is written, but the meaning is that it will be the case. It will be the case. So Russia officially becomes a tyranny. And again, as what I started with, is that it's what Putin's ambitions towards Ukraine, his obsession with Ukraine, is deeply connected to what he does inside Russia and how he sees his own future in Russia and and how he builds how he takes power more and more, and how his tyranny expands inside Russia. So I will finish this little expose with the message that I started with, that it's not imperial syndrome which is responsible for the start of this war, but Putin's ambition. Again, I can elaborate and tell you the story of when and how I think he made his decision, and even at this meeting in February 21st, when he talks to his officials, to so-called Security Council, when he starts the war, virtually 3 or 4, maximum 5 present understand what is going on. The others just don't know that he decided to invade Ukraine already. He keeps it secret from his own staff, from everybody. But and what is paramount is his own obsession, his own ambition, and this despotism and the idea of indefinite rule stand behind the war he started in February 2022. I'm sorry it took too long. I thought it would be shorter. As always, I'm really very sorry.
Don't apologize. If you have any questions, please, perhaps, Mikhail, if you can repeat the question, if that's possible, so that the live stream can also hear what the people are saying.
Okay. Again, the idea was to explain how it all started. Yeah.
At the beginning of your lecture, you told us about your book and that all the steps towards the invasion can be seen in the book.
Yep.
And I was wondering, when you finished it in February, did you see it coming, the invasion, or was it a big surprise?
I did. Yes, we did. Well, I mean, yes. Starting from late fall last year, it became pretty clear that it's heading towards the war. For me, it was clear because I already knew what I just told you, and connected to what military analysts started to explain in November last year, that position of Russian troops around Ukraine is such that they are poised to attack. And I connected it with what I already know because I just written this book, and it's all there. And politically and technically, it's all about war. And Putin has decided that he has no other option. He's obsessed with Ukraine, and he has no other option. But again, you can never. I mean, rationally, you understand that it's heading towards the war. But when it starts, it's totally different. You can never envision really see it through. It still comes as such a deep shock, because rationally you understand. Yeah, well, it will start in late February. And everything is over. Our lives will never be the same. Dost will be over in Russia. It will be over. It will be. I mean, we will have to run, whatever. But that's what you. But when it comes to practice, that's very different. Oh, sorry. I have to repeat the question.
Nemtsov.
Right.
So maybe you can say a little bit Ukraine? Because obviously he was investigating.
Yeah, of course, of course.
2014, just before he was.
Of course, yes.
Maybe this was even one of the reasons why he was murdered.
Right.
At that particular time. So
Yes.
maybe you can tell a little bit.
I will.
A bit more to.
Of course, of course. So the question is about what Nemtsov and Ukraine. Why Ukraine is so deeply, heavily represented in this book is because I see Russia's history through Nemtsov, and Nemtsov is deeply involved. He was taking floor at Maidan in 2004. He's already an outcast in Russia, but he turns back to politics. He basically decided in 2004 he decided that he would quit political life because, well, what to do in Putin's Russia. But Ukraine and Maidan, Orange Revolution, gets him back to politics, back to political life, and he takes floor. He becomes Yushchenko's advisor after Yushchenko becomes president, and Ukraine is his well, sort of a new home since then. And of course, when Euromaidan starts, when the Revolution of Dignity starts, he's deeply, well, not physically involved because he's not allowed to enter Ukraine. Yanukovych forbid him to enter Ukraine, but emotionally he's very involved, of course, because his idea is that if Ukraine can become a normal democracy, European type of country, then Russia can do so too. That's his idea from early 2000s, and that he would defend through all of his life. And one of my findings when I wrote this book is that he was murdered by this war, the war that started full scale in last February. Technically, he was killed by a murderer from a gang of murderers connected to Ramzan Kadyrov. But it was this new climate of violence in Russia, which started after Putin started the zero phase of this war in Donbass, and after he took Crimea. And technically, it's deeply connected because it's Chechen authorities of Chechnya. Ramzan Kadyrov starts paying attention to Nemtsov in spring 2014, after mercenaries from Chechnya start entering Ukraine, just as now, but on a lesser scale, to fight in Donbass. And Nemtsov starts to oppose it and to talk about it and to expose it. And that's when they, who's this guy? What's he's doing here? And that's when they start paying attention, and that leads to his murder. That's my understanding of things. But emotionally, he couldn't take it. He couldn't stand it. He came out with the slogan, "Putin is war," in September 2014. Before we even understood this is true, he came with this final truth about what is going on, and he was he sort of foreseen it. He was murdered because of it. He became its, I would say, one of the first victims.
There's another question over there.
How do you view the future of democracy and corruption in Ukraine after the war will end?
The question is about the future of Ukraine after the war would end. I mean, I'm not. I mean, there are better speakers about Ukraine. I'm not that much involved, and I really do not know much about internal political climate in Ukraine. But I see it as Now I clearly see its path towards Europe, and this is absolutely, I think, clear by now. Ukraine will be restored, rebuilt after this war, and I believe will join democratic European nations. That's, I think, a very clear path now. And now it's no longer the case. I mean, even in 2014, well, the referendum in Crimea that Putin made, it was rigged, of course. Numbers are not true. But in Crimea was not that pro-Ukrainian. This is also true, and this is also a fact. We don't know exact numbers probably, but huge part of people of Crimea supported Russia back then, and even in the East, it was also partly the case. We know the polls, we know the numbers. Well, starting from February 2022, it's no longer the case, and Ukraine is a united nation which stands against Putin's aggression.
In the beginning of the lecture, you mentioned that Putin really rose to power so fast from being middle manager in some administration into being somebody in a position to become a successor to Yeltsin. How do you think that happened? And could it be related to corruption involved, or how is it possible that somebody still in the 90s, where Russia was relatively free and there was a competition in politics, how is it possible that somebody could really come out of nothing and just go all the way up through the political ranks so fast?
Well, he's a sort of smart person, individual in a way, and the question is about how Putin made his career in the Kremlin in the late 90s, and what he knows how to. He really knows apparently how to do that. He knows how to make people believe he's one of them, and that apparently what happened when Yeltsin's team absorbed him in 1997, and when it came to, so that's how he made his career. That was basically his smart inside game inside the apparatus. It's not connected to democratic institutions, not at all. It's just I don't know. You can probably find this types of managers inside corporations who make their way through quite easily and fast. Probably this type of person. But in 1999, in spring of 1999, when final battle looms of what happens next, and after Yeltsin leaves the Kremlin, and Yeltsin and his circle have to fight. Not well. Of course, it was the idea of moving the same direction politically, but it also the problem was that it always in Russia's undeveloped democracy. It was always from the very start. It was about at stake was much more for these specific people, for the elite. It basically was the question of what will happen to them next, and are they secure? What will happen to them personally? Because everything could happen. The problem with Russia's in 1996, when Yeltsin became president again, in 1993, and before that, the problem is that in making these decisions, at stake was not I mean, I'm now at power, and then I am opposition, then I can come back to power, and that's how democracy works. But no, because prosperity, capitals, fortunes, even lives and personal liberty were at stake for these for everyone involved. And then in 1999, in the spring of 1999, they decide that Putin is their best bet to secure their own future after Yeltsin, and to basically again to continue the road, because he is clean slate. He doesn't have what we see in a democracy as a liability. If we don't know about this particular individual, what he stands for, why would we even vote for him? In that case, was seen as a benefit, and he's new. He's a clean slate. Nobody knows him. That's why, and he's also he has this not military but law enforcement touch, which is already in demand in Russia already, because of this frustration was already growing after default of 1998. So they decided that he's their best bet.
Patrick, and then you. Patrick?
During the 1990s, I believe there was a general understanding that the future of Russia could be found in the future of the North Caucasus, which explains why Yeltsin launched his war and why Putin launched his war in Chechnya. Do you think today that appraisal is still valid? And what do you think the year 2023 has in store for Russia?
So how war in Chechnya shaped Russian? The question is how war in Chechnya shaped Russia's future? No.
Or how can
That
the future of Russia be seen in the North Caucasus, or how can events in the North Caucasus shape Russia's future?
When Yeltsin, it's really a long and different story of why and how Yeltsin started. Again, it's also in this book. If you can always read it, and I can spend another hour and a half easily talking about it. But it's really a different long story. Again, it's never black and white, and it's what was it about and why Yeltsin started. But I believe its origins are very different from what happens now. Now in Ukraine. But it so happened that the war in Chechnya really shaped Russia's future, because it gave birth to this deep frustration when Russia lost the first war in Chechnya in 1996, and Yeltsin had to make peace on their terms, and then Putin again sort of started anew. And again, there were reasons behind it because of terror attacks, and there was an attack on Dagestan, originating from Chechnya. But it really shaped this climate of acceptance of violence. I think me neither, we didn't understand it that well back then. Now in retrospect, it's much more visible and understandable and clear. But back then it was really very different. I mean, we were younger, and we didn't understand that. And everything was so new, and Putin was new, and this war, it had its real reasons behind it, and then we tried to look at it through these lenses. I even know it about myself. But now we see, and well, not now, we started seeing it even before the war started, that it created that acceptance of labeling a nation as enemy, and violence, killing, murdering, torturing people, which we now see again. since then, it has never been resolved. And if you see it, what Chechnya is now, and what under Ramzan Kadyrov, and Russia, Moscow, Putin allowed it to happen. It's a little totalitarian state inside deeply authoritarian Russia, still sort of, and it's not a coincidence that Ramzan Kadyrov is one of the main hawkish voices of this war, of course, and when Putin goes, I think that there will be some kind of new phase, something new will start, of course, because Kadyrov depends. His powers come from above, from Putin, because he's accepted, and what he's doing is accepted. After Nemtsov was murdered, Putin had a choice. He could punish Nemtsov's murderers. He definitely knows who they are, not only who implemented it, but also who was behind it. He totally knows. From the next day, he knew. I believe he's not behind. By the way, to be clear about that, he didn't give this order. That's what I believe. And he had to make. He could make another choice, but he made his choice. And now we see also what it led to, in a way. So it will start again. Something it definitely will be different this time. What Russia's future holds in next year, I think it's pretty much clear. Putin will keep losing the war. He is losing for many months already, and the more he will be losing it, the more repression will come over Russia. That will be his response to his losing. He already changed the narrative. He's no longer fights Nazis in Ukraine. He fights demons of the West, and that's the fight that can stay with him forever. You can always, with the West, that it just never ends. It's not. You will never be able. It's this final battle with the global evil. And it's possible that he will not win. So can last forever. It will not last forever. But if we're talking about next year, it will.
I think we'll have two more questions here in the first row, and then the gentleman over there. Yeah, thank you.
So you make the case that Putin's obsessions with Ukraine started, in a sense, around this Orange Revolution of 2004.
Yes.
And also in line with his obsession in general with the Color Revolution.
Yes.
Were there any people that recognized this very early on in 2004, 2005? And can we learn anything from that?
I don't know them. No, that what will happen, that could foresee what would happen in the future. Alexei Arestovich, the same who now says that the plan originated in 2005. He's a smart person, of course, but it's a fact that he basically foreseen the war in 2014. In 2014, there were people who knew, who understood, not knew, but understood that it would end with an invasion. And we know, again, in retrospect, just journalistically know that from 2014, Putin was sort of pushed by hardliners inside the Kremlin, and that he would, back then in 2014, he would have implemented his plan that he was threatening Yanukovych with, that he would take eastern Ukraine. But he decided he was, apparently was afraid. But that idea was already in his head.
I think you might have answered my question already with the last sentence.
later he had already decided that he should invade Ukraine. Why did he not push for more in 2014, given that you could say Ukrainian identity was weaker and the army was not as good as they are now? Like, what do you think holds him back, or were there other factors that came into play in his decision making?
That's a good question, but apparently he didn't feel this crisis of Euromaidan and Revolution of Dignity took him by surprise. He didn't expect it. He was not preparing for it. Well, of course, by the time he took Crimea, the idea of taking Crimea was already on the table for quite a long time, apparently. But to really invade, you have to prepare. He didn't probably think he was ready. And again, he was, the longer he stays in power, the more free he sees himself to do things. Just to start the major war in Europe, just like this. Well, now it looks like it's an easy decision for him. But back then it was probably not. I mean, you just basically break every rule and start a war. That's quite a risky and a big call to make. He probably was not sort of emotionally, internally ready for this kind of scale of war. He always makes these missteps. He doesn't understand the consequences of what he's doing, which we already see with this war very clearly. But he probably understood that it would be a big deal, and he is not ready. I think.
Well, we have time for one more.
You have to have the guts, you know, to start it. He probably didn't have them back then at that scale. He's quite a breakthrough sort of guy. He can be not afraid of doing things, as we know. But still, I mean, there are some limits that he is afraid to cross.
Shall we take one more question, and then I think it's
Yeah.
time to leave the building.
Sure.
Yeah, okay. I would like to know, well, your personal, well, you're working now from abroad, like many Russians have fled the country, and yeah, what are your hopes for the country? Because, and what are you trying to achieve from abroad to change? But yeah, I think we all agree that the change has to come in Russia. Will it?
Oh, I feel that what I started with is that I feel my own responsibility, and I have to. I'm deeply traumatized, of course, by that. I had to leave Russia, and my family had to leave Russia. But whatever I can do to make this war end sooner rather than later, I have to do. And my tool, my weapon is myself and TV Rain and television screen. And so what I have to do is to bring truth about this war back to Russia, deeply cut from reality by Putin's propaganda. So if I can do that, I have to do it, and that's my basically plan for until this war ends, and we'll see what's next.
Well, lots of luck doing it.
So, well, thank you very much, Mikhail, for
Thank you.
This wonderful lecture.
Thank you for having me. It was honor and pleasure to be.